What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and as I have always told you guys when it comes to this channel, when any of you guys come up with a really cool theory that I like to make sure that I give you guys credit. And one of you all, somebody named Greenlight Me, had this really cool idea. Now, they said they saw an early script of the movie. I wouldn't take this as an absolute truth. I'm not calling you a liar, I'm simply just saying that in this day and age, there's so many leaks and rumors out there that have been debunked or confirmed. There's no real way to know what's actually true or false until we sit down and we see the movie. However, I loved this. So I want to run over this, and then I actually kind of want to talk about it as we go through these various portions here. So what they said is that Max Dillon, Electro, is the first one to be pulled in to the Marvel Cinematic Universe when the whole spell with Spider-Man basically goes awry. And he's pulled into the Marvel Cinematic Universe after he's electrocuted in The Amazing Spider-Man, but before he falls into the vat of eels, which kind of makes sense because he basically gets electrocuted, then he starts falling. And so it would make sense that like a portal would open up under him and he would land in the MCU. Now, from what Greenlight Me said, he lands in a fountain in New York. And for the most part, it seems really weird that he was suddenly transported to a new location. Doesn't really seem to know exactly what's going on, but New York doesn't look that different from New York in his universe, so he just ends up kind of rolling with it. Now, I would argue that what makes this interesting is this seems to fly in the face of how Electro got his powers in the first place. Because remember, Max Dillon was electrocuted and then fell into the vat of eels and then was bitten by electric eels. But it wasn't until he was bitten by the eels that he started to change, right? His skin started to adjust and he became the Electro that we saw in The Amazing Spider-Man. And so what that always seemed to indicate to me is that him being electrocuted just kind of knocked him into the water and set the stage for the electric eels biting him to basically turn him into Electro, to kind of channel their electrical energy into him and then turn him into the villain that he ended up becoming. Now, Greenlight Me goes on to say that following his arrival in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that he simply just like adjusts his look, gets a haircut, and then tries to blend in. There isn't really any explanation in terms of how he basically navigates this new universe that he's in. I would go as far as to say that when you look at the New York skyline as a whole, assuming we leave out like Avengers Tower, because that's kind of gone through a few things. If you guys recall, it was Stark Tower initially, then it was rebranded as Avengers Tower, and then after the events, or really during the events of Civil War, that basically it was sold off, and then ultimately the Avengers moved to upstate New York, and that more recently during Spider-Man Far From Home, it was being remodeled. So leaving that whole thing out, when you look at the nature of the New York skyline between like 2013, which is when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 took place, and 2024, which is when Spider-Man No Way Home takes place, you're not gonna see a massive difference. New York's overall skyline doesn't change that much. Smaller buildings will, but not the entire skyline itself. More so than that, Maxwell Dillon, while he was a little socially awkward, was not an idiot. Like, he was pretty intelligent. So I would have to imagine that just by virtue of being teleported to a new place and just kind of being like, what in the world is going on here? He would probably figure out pretty fast that he's in a different universe, not his native universe. Now, what kind of things transpire as he explores that, I don't really know, but I could definitely see that happening pretty easily. Now, following this, and this is when things get really interesting, Greenlight Me says that the next two people to arrive are Dr. Octopus and then the Green Goblin, right? So Electro first, Doc Ock second, Green Goblin third. And that it's actually Doctor Strange that helps Spider-Man capture Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin. And so the capturing of Dr. Octopus probably takes place in that scene or around that scene from the trailer when he basically gets his hands on Peter Parker and then he says like, you're not Peter, right? When Tom Holland unmasks himself, you guys all know that really popular scene that like everybody's talking about because it's so exciting. And so with that being the case, I could easily see where like Doctor Strange shows up around that time, or he and Spider-Man were working together, whatever the case is, and basically Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin are captured. Now, what Greenlight Me also goes on to say is that that particular scene where you see Doctor Strange push Peter Parker, his essence or his kind of spiritual form out of his body, that's the whole scenario that leads to him basically freeing Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin by accident. What's also kind of interesting here is it looks like Electro never actually gets captured in the box by Doctor Strange. Instead, while that whole thing's going on with Doc Ock and the Green Goblin being captured by Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, Electro's out there doing his own thing. What it is that he's doing is really intriguing because according to Greenlight Me, it comes from a character that I imagine most of us forgot about, or never even considered in the first place. Now, what's important here is that in our video where we talked about what was going on with Electro and Stark Tech and all that kind of stuff, that we kind of created this argument that time has passed, right? That it doesn't just happen over the course of like a few days, that some period of time is passing here. And Greenlight Me really kind of confirms that in his theory, right? Where he basically says the whole thing takes place over the course of 6 weeks. And so where Dr. Octopus and apparently Green Goblin are freed by Peter Parker, they ultimately end up tracking down Electro. Now, this part of the theory is one that I'm not 100% sure I'm on board with. It seems kind of hokey and kind of lame, but they basically convince Electro to work with them in order to stay in the MCU, because apparently if he goes back to his own universe, he'll end up turning into Blue Electro. I would go as far as to argue that whether they overheard it or they were even just told directly, that they're aware of the statement Doctor Strange made to Peter Parker, which is they're destined to die fighting their own Spider-Man. And so that would likely be their motivation for staying in the MCU. If I'm being honest, I don't really think that Dr. Octopus or Green Goblin would care that if Electro went back to his own universe, that he would look like a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. I don't think it really matters to them all that much. But I could definitely see them wanting to work with him to stay in their universe or in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they're basically not guaranteeing their own demise by going back to their own universe. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting and really cool, because looking at the trailer, one of the things that we've all kind of noticed and multiple people have pointed out is that it looks like Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin and Electro, those three specifically, all seem to have Stark Tech. And that would make sense because they're the three individuals that need some form of technology to utilize their capabilities, right? Green Goblin uses technology for the Goblin Glider, Dr. Octopus uses technology for his tentacles, and Electro uses technology to channel and control his abilities. And so what seems to end up happening here, again, according to Greenlight Me, is that they end up going to visit someone that they basically end up acquiring Stark Tech from. And that person is not Vulture. Instead, it's Powerbroker, which I never would have considered. I never would have considered the idea that Sharon Carter, as the Powerbroker, would be the one to give them the kind of technology they need to attain their goals. And it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Like, I know that the role of Sharon Carter in the events of Falcon and the Winter Soldier didn't seem like a very substantial event, didn't seem like a very substantial role. But the important thing here is that if anything was solidified by her, it's that she's trying to maintain absolute power, right? Trying to control, make sure all things flow through her, kind of the kingpin of the Madripoor world. On top of that, what you also have is her disdain for S.H.I.E.L.D., and seemingly the superhero community as a whole. So it wouldn't really strike me as beyond the realm of possibility for Electro and Green Goblin and Doc Ock to show up on the doorstep of the Powerbroker or to be summoned by the Powerbroker, assuming that Sharon's ability to gain information is exactly what it was during Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and she, by way of the various sources she has pretty much figured out exactly what's gone on with the spell and all that kind of stuff, that they're here from an alternate reality. And then they kind of come together and it's like, okay, I will give you Stark Tech so long as you promise to uphold your end of the bargain, which is to kill Spider-Man and like destroy the superhero community or something along those lines. Is it kind of a flimsy line of logic? Sure, but I do believe there is some kind of logic between them and Powerbroker. It seems too great of a possibility to pass up. It just seems awesome, right? It would be a great surprise where people are just like, I forgot about Sharon Carter, the Powerbroker. Yes, of course it makes sense, right? It seems like it's just too great of an opportunity to pass up there. Now, what Greenlight Me goes on to say is that because of the fact that each one of these guys need to operate at their peak capacity, seemingly it's in the best interest of Doc Ock and Green Goblin to make sure Electro is at his peak capacity. And so what they end up doing is using a combination of Stark Tech and seemingly something that a lot of you guys have pointed out, which is basically the suit of Whiplash from Iron Man 2. They kind of Frankenstein hodgepodge it all together, and that's where Electro gets his suit from. Quite literally, it's designed by Doc Ock and the Green Goblin working together to make it the suit he needs to regulate his powers. And that's how he becomes the yellow Electro that we see in the movie. Now, the other thing about this is Doctor Strange. The question has to be asked, what's Doctor Strange doing in all this? And what Greenlight Me says is that Doctor Strange is not actually out in space or in the multiverse dealing with all these different portals opening up all over the place, that instead what had happened is that when Peter and Doctor Strange got into that fight, which basically led to Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin being freed, that it also trapped Doctor Strange in the 1970s. This is actually a great idea, especially if what you're wanting to do is essentially introduce Wolverine into the MCU. And I'll talk about that here in a second, but I think it's a genius idea, right, to trap him there. Eventually, he ends up coming back, but in doing so, it leads to a continued destabilization of the multiverse, and that's why Venom, and that's why Sandman, and like the Lizard, and those guys get yanked in. Because Doctor Strange, in order to travel back to the main Marvel Universe, kind of has to break the multiverse a little bit more in order to make that happen. The other part of this is that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire seemingly have also been pulled into the MCU. And a brunt of what goes on with the movie is actually the three of them, right? So Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield working together to try to find out where all the villains are. Now, as far as this idea of introducing Wolverine to the MCU, this is one of those fun theories that I've had for a long time. All you really do here is you say that because Hydra had taken over S.H.I.E.L.D., that they were trying to find a way to create more Captain Americas. That led to them discovering like James Howlett, who was part of probably a Black Ops team in the 1960s, working with the CIA, and that basically led to them taking him along with the rest of his team, which was codenamed Team X, and then essentially throwing them into Weapons Plus, or throwing them into Weapon X, which is the 10th attempt by essentially S.H.I.E.L.D. to create a new Captain America. The other ones never really worked. Wolverine was basically the most successful, and that he's kind of, you know, doing his thing out there in the world or something along those lines. I mean, I wouldn't expect it to be a major plot point. I would expect it to be like a reference to Wolverine if they were going to have him there at all. Like, do you remember in, what was it, X-Men Apocalypse, when like they ended up discovering like Wolverine, basically like when he was being held in like the mountain and they were like using him as a test subject and they had the thing over his head, like Jean Grey and them like free him, something akin to that, maybe just a little bit less. I think it'd be cool. I'm by no means expecting it, but I think it'd be kind of interesting there. But the important thing to grasp, this is the important thing to talk about here, this is all just a theory that Greenlight Me had, which apparently he saw a leaked version of the script. Again, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if any of this is accurate. We can just kind of take this as a theory and really nothing more until we actually see the movie. But regardless, if this is actually what happens in the film, which he also says there's like 3 other major surprises that he just wouldn't spoil. Again, I don't know if that's true or not, but if just what he revealed over the course of that comment is really what happens in the movie, it sounds great. Like, it sounds like a phenomenal film. I'm excited to see it. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Do you guys think there's a very high likelihood of this? Do you think it seems a little too far-fetched, a little too simple? Let me know what you guys think. But thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.